I'm Caleb Harris, and this is a slab flattening sled. Now, you've probably seen designs like this before because they're very easy to build and use, and with it you can flatten a slab of almost any size using just a router, which makes it possible to work with really wide pieces of wood to make live edge tables and floating shelves and all kinds of other stuff that doesn't fit on a joiner or a planer, or without those tools entirely on smaller stock. Now, I call the router a common tool, but if you're just a very occasional woodworker, this may not be in your shop. So I channeled my inner Izzy Swan and asked myself, is there a way to make a sled like this work with a more common tool, like a circular saw? And this is the design I came up with. It's basically the same, it's just a little bit wider to accommodate the size of the circular saw. So if you stick with me, I'll show you how you can make this too. I raided my plywood scrap pile to get all the pieces for this, but if you don't have any, you could make all the cuts out of a piece of plywood with just a circular saw. I made it out of 23/32, which is basically 3/4 inch pine plywood. I decided to leave the back wall of the sled tall, thinking that it would add more rigidity because of how wide the sled will be. To make the ends, I mocked up the sled and then transferred the height of the front and the back to the end piece and connected the dots before cutting it on the bandsaw. Then I just copied that finished piece onto the second piece and cut it out so it'd have both end pieces. I assembled the whole thing using 1.5 inch number 8 wood screws. I used a pilot bit that also pre-drills and countersinks at the same time to make sure the screws wouldn't blow out the wood. But glue and brad nails would work just as well. I just didn't want to wait for glue to dry so I could get to use with this thing. I actually finished this project about 2 months ago, but unfortunately right now I can only get a video out about every 2 to 3 weeks. However, on Instagram I post nearly daily and I'm pretty active in the stories, so if you want to stay up to date on what I'm normally working on, you should go follow me over there. There's a link in the description below to my page. For the circular saw to work in this, I cut a base that would fit snugly inside of the sled and marked where the cutout in the sled met the base. I used those marks to help me position the saw on the base because when the blade is lowered, it has to fit inside of that cutout. Then I used a handful of wood screws to secure it tightly to the base. I positioned the saw at a slight angle, so when I make a pass, it's going to cut a groove instead of a really thin curve. This is going to make feeding the saw go more slowly, but I think that the speed loss will be made up by the fact that each pass will remove more material. The sled needs some rails to ride on. For that, I used some straight 2x4 cutoffs and screwed some feet onto them made out of scrap plywood. To make sure the rails are perfectly straight, you could run them over the jointer or table saw, but I wanted to show that this entire build could be done with just a circular saw and still give good results, so I skipped that. Now to test it. For testing, I just put a heavy slab on my driveway and then wedged it so it wouldn't rock. It's a personal judgment based on the slab and the tool you're using, whether you need to secure the slab to something. The circular saw worked well. My results were a bit rough, but it would clean up quick with a belt sander, or I could have gotten better results by moving the sled less between each pass. Now, I did make this to work with the router as well, so I went ahead and tried that. The router came out cleaner and was a lot faster because those bits take a much wider cut each pass than the circular saw does. But it still needed some belt sanding to smooth it out. I'll leave a link below to the inexpensive router bit I found on Amazon that worked well for me. I made this sled to batch out some tables from some wood I collected last year that is dry now. To make these tables, I put the sled on my workbench so I could secure the smaller slabs. That worked well, and my back was also very thankful to not be working on the ground. But it did take about 2 weeks to get all of the sawdust cleaned up out of my shop. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and consider subscribing. If you have any questions about how to build or use this, or want to tell me that it's really stupid to attempt such a thing with a circular saw when you can buy a router really cheap on Craigslist, you can go into the comments down below and ask or tell me all those things. Thanks.